What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in. Sims here. Today we're going to talk about the different drug classes. Going to talk about some examples from all those drug classes, some newer drugs that you might not have heard of, some new ones that are getting popular right now, or when they were older chemicals were popular. Um, it's going to be kind of a basic overview of the drug classes. So there's going to be some beginner stuff in there, but I'm going to try and throw in some current information, more advanced stuff for you guys who already know a lot about this. So, jumping right into it, first class is psychedelics. And psychedelics are just kind of broad class. There's a lot of different categories for them, but your most popular ones are LSD, psilocybin, mushrooms, and stuff like DMT, which is a little more obscure but still very well known and popular. So, first class of psychedelics is the lysergamines. That's LSD and its analogs, any chemicals that have the same basic structure as LSD or tweaked LSD molecules. There actually is a lot of those out there, and most of the stuff being sold as LSD now is different LSD analogs because it's hard to distinguish the difference between a lot of them. Some test kits won't tell you the difference between an LSD analog and LSD. It just tests to see if it's a lysergamide at all. So LSD is pretty expensive to make, and it's not something that can be done in a more advanced country where that stuff is usually trafficked, like the U.S. Obviously you need some pretty high tech equipment, expensive stuff like a real lab to get it done. So a lot of stuff is sold as LSD that's not, or it's just lysergamide analogs. Anyways, second class of hallucinogenic is tryptamines. Tryptamines are psilocybin mushrooms are considered a tryptamine. So is DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and these mimic the structure of the neurotransmitter serotonin. And basically, they all follow that same structure. They usually last a little shorter than lysergamines. Some are orally active, some aren't. But your major ones are DMT and psilocybin and psilocin, stuff like that. Then next you have phenethylamines. And phenethylamines are uh, similar to amphetamines in shape. Alexander Shuglin was famous for researching and discovering a lot of phenethylamines, including 2CB, 2CI, all the 2C compounds, and some of the more advanced phenethylamines like the N-bombs or the N-bows, 25I N-bomb, 25C, 25B N-bomb. These were really popular from 2010, 2012 when they hit the market until a few years later, maybe 2016 or so. They started to become a little less available because U.S. government um, made them illegal, and they're really bitter. The doses are a little higher than LSD doses, so they were often laid on tabs. But the reason people couldn't pass them as acid for long was because they have a really bitter taste, and they numb your mouth. So it's easy to tell when you have those if you just have a little bit of information on psychedelics. But just because a tab is not numbing your mouth or bitter does not mean it's actually LSD. There could be any other of a list of chemicals that is a psychedelic and doesn't have a taste. But the N bombs were really popular for a while and kind of replaced acid. They were available much more cheaply than traditional psychedelics or real LSD, so they were sold as LSD for a long time. There's also another class of hallucinogenic, the DOX compounds. Most popular one's called DOC. These are a little older, but not that many people know about them because they're less popular and have bad side effects and last a long time, so they never really took off. DOC was sold, I want to say, in the 70s and 80s under the name STP, Serenity, Tranquility, Peace, and they are similar to LSD but longer lasting, more vasoconstrictive, and a hard body load, so they didn't really give a good trip. People don't like them that much, and they're kind of toxic and dangerous, so they never became a very popular compound. Moving on to the next class, which is sometimes confused with hallucinogenics. They cross over a little bit. All drugs can cross over into other drug classes, but they're just classified based on what their most prominent effect is and what receptors they bond to the tightest. Uh, so dissociatives are different than classical hallucinogens, which are usually considered serotogenic hallucinogens. Regular hallucinogens like LSD, DMT, they work on your um, 5-HTA2 serotonin receptor specifically. There's a lot more going on there, as always, but that's the major receptor they work on. They cause colorful hallucinations and distortions. The dissociatives don't really give you colorful hallucinations. They more give you double vision and give you a sense of disconnectedness from your body. They numb pain, and they make you feel like you're in a faraway place. They can distort depth perception, so things look really far away or really close or big or small. And this class includes ketamine and PCP. Ketamine's by far the most popular. It's a little shorter acting and doesn't have as severe side effects as PCP. Obviously, there's tons of analogs of both of these. These are examples of aryl hexyl I'm sorry, aryl cyclohexylamines. They're the most common dissociative group, and they consist of a couple of carbon rings fused together. PCP is really long acting. That was one of the earlier ones. It was even used in medicine, but causes agitation and it lasts a long time. A lot of side effects. So it was discontinued and replaced by ketamine, which lasts a much shorter duration, lower side effect profile, and for the most part is pretty safe and is still popular and used today. There's a lot of newer some of the newer ones are deschlorofluoroketamine, 2,4-ketamine. A lot of new ketamine analogs. There's some PCP analogs too, which the PCP analogs tend to be a little more abusable, but or more euphoric. But that's only for people who really like the compounds usually. There was one that was really popular around 2012 to 2014, or maybe as early as 2009 or 10. It's called MXE, or methoxetamine, and it was basically a ketamine analog that lasted longer. It was more euphoric. It also debatably had a little bit of opiate receptor binding, so it causes some opiate effects and more release of dopamine. It was a really popular and generally considered to be a good compound. It was developed because ketamine's major side effect is that it can damage your bladder over long-term use, and methoxetamine was created in an attempt to reduce the bladder effects. It's debatable if it has the same effect or is less harmful than ketamine, but both don't really cause problems as long as they're used responsibly. There's also diaryl ethylamines, which are another class of dissociative. Obviously, there's so many different classes of these drugs. There's no way we could fit them all into one video, and A lot of them are so obscure that most people have never heard of them anyways, except for people in the field. Um, these both these classes of compounds had a period of time after 2010 where the laws were catching up with them, but as of now, most of them are still illegal federally in the U.S. Most of the states don't keep up with research chemical laws very well, so as long as you're charged on the state level, it's usually you can get out of research chemical cases by really pushing the lab results. But federally in the U.S., we have something called the Analog Act, which basically allows them to prosecute you for having or selling any drug if it is deemed similar enough or has a close enough effect to an illegal drug. They can charge you with actually selling that illegal drug. So the United States is pretty strict on analog laws, but as you go over to Europe and stuff, most of them don't have analog laws, and it just goes by the country whether the compounds are legal or not. So there is some new dissociative compounds. They're newer MXE based compounds, analogs of MXE, methoxetamine. And some of them have just been released. There's more expected to hit the market soon, but I'm pretty sure laws will catch up with those pretty quick. Because unlike some other drug classes, they tend to Schedule 1 dissociatives pretty quickly. So moving on to empathogens, which cross over a lot with stimulants. Pretty much all empathogens can be considered stimulants, and a lot of stims can be considered empathogens. The biggest one in this group is the MD compounds, which is MDMA and MDA, your typical, most well-known ecstasy drugs. You also have benzofurans, which is where the methylene dioxy ring on MDMA and MDA is slightly altered to not be a double oxygen ring. And then you have aminoindanes, which are a more obscure molecule also. Not many people know about it. They may have done it and not known that they did it, thinking it was MDMA or something. But we'll do another video based around different structures and structure-activity relationships a little later down the line when I can do some video editing. So then we move on to stimulants. Obviously, you've got amphetamines, the biggest class. Easy to make, cheap to make, with simple industrial chemicals, simple molecular structure that allows them to be built through a bunch of different pathways, and easy to improvise and cheap to make. So real popular all around the world. Obviously, regular amphetamines and methamphetamines are the biggest ones, and tons of analogs of those. The fluorinated amphetamines are really popular, and fluorinated methamphetamines. Next group in stimulants is cathinones, which are also called beta-keto amphetamines. They basically have a ketone functional group attached on the beta carbon of an amphetamine and slightly alters their effects. This class of drugs was discovered in a plant called khat, which is a popular drug of abuse in the Middle East. The leaves of this plant can be chewed, and it's basically the Africa and Middle Eastern version of coca leaves, where you can chew it and it's kind of a short-lived amphetamine effect. It's pretty mild. Most popular cathinone, the one that really made the class popular, was the I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. Mephedrone. Mephedrone was discovered by an Israeli research chemist. That was he posted the synthesis and about his use of it, on an online forum that was known as the Hive at the time, which was a really big group in researching and developing new designer drugs for a period until it was shut down. It moved to Rhodium, and bits and users from the site can still be found around the internet if you know where to dig for them. So mephedrone really set off the cathinone market. People started playing with them a lot more, trying to make new compounds. That's where you get the BK MDMA, which is also known as methylone, ethylone, butylone, pentadrone. The lone compounds like methylone and ethylone are just the cathinone derivatives of MDMA. So they're pretty similar. They were sold for a long time as MDMA replacements, were usually just sold as MDMA, and they were considered to be pretty good compounds in general. A lot of people didn't like them just because they thought they were fake as compared to MDMA, but tons of people who didn't know what they were taking loved the drugs, and some people who know more about chemicals just like them in their own right. So those have been legalized or illegalized in the States and most other countries for a long time now. So people keep developing new cathinones to catch up with the laws and stuff. Then you have next class in stimulants is tropanes. That is what cocaine is. It's a naturally occurring compound in plants that is similar to cocaine, and there is a bunch of cocaine analogs and some that can be made fully synthetically. You also have piperidines, which piperidines are a synthetic class of stimulants. Examples of it are Ritalin, which is methylphenidate, and you have a bunch of analogs of that. You know, people work with the structure all the time. You have fluoromethylphenidate, ethylphenidate, and tons more behind it. Many more to come. Then piperazines. Piperazines are a drug group that was a little more popular a few years ago. It was often sold as an amphetamine, but even though they're really molecularly similar, they are different, but they are built with the same cheap, easily available, readily available industrial chemicals. So they saw a large rise in popularity. I think they were even legalized in New Zealand for a little while, and the doses were regulated and everything until they reversed their drug laws to make them more draconian instead of progressive. They had been making great leaps and bounds. So you don't hear a lot about those compounds now, but there is more piperidines and piperazines coming out all the time. Now, after that, you've got pyrrolidines and pyrovalerones, which are often known as bath salts. Pyrrolidines are amphetamines that are altered, and sorry you guys, I'm a little tired, so it's getting away from me. And pyrovalerones are a different type of cathinone, but those two are really similar. Most popular one, most famous one was alpha PVP or APVP, and that is what was famous for the case in Florida where the homeless guy ate someone's face or something along those lines. And now you have a PHP replacing it, which is still pretty popular. These compounds are really, really strong stimulants. They don't have the long legs of methamphetamine, but they last pretty long, and they're pretty heavy drug, but people who like them usually really like them. They're still available. Alpha PVP was made illegal in Florida on the state level after that whole incident, and they got a lot of bad publicity. They called it Flocka down there. Um, but there's some newer ones still available online. Okay, so moving on to opioids. Opioids have a bunch of different class compounds too. That's too intricate to get into because tons of drugs have opiate effects and work on your opiate receptors, even though they're not considered opiates. For instance, there's amphetamine analog called camphetamine that is like an amphetamine that also works on your opiate receptors, but it's considered a stimulant and not a opioid. Opiates and opioids are distinguished because an opiate is usually considered a naturally occurring opioid, or one specifically from the poppy and with the same compound structure. Opioids just cover anything that is that group of drugs that works on your opiate receptors. So you obviously have fentanyl, real popular now. That is a fully synthetic opiate. You've got some newer ones like Edazine, which I'm gonna take a guess here and say that that's gonna begin to replace fentanyl, because fentanyl, as everybody knows, was not illegal in China for a long time. So we had a lot of it. There was a lot of it being made, a lot of fentanyl labs over there, and it was coming and up in the U.S., or they would sell precursors to Mexico, and the cartels would make fentanyl and smuggle it in. And it causes a lot of deaths because usually fentanyls are very potent, very cheap, and usually pretty easy to make. There's even a one-pot synthesis for fentanyl, so it doesn't take a lot to make it, and a little bit goes a long way. The Edazine compounds are about the same strength as fentanyl. Maybe some are a little stronger, some are a little weaker, but they have a much larger and better safety profile. Even though they have the same analgesic potency as the fentanyls, they're many times safer in terms of respiratory depression. It takes much more to cause it. However, these compounds, like fentanyl, are very short-lived, and they jack up your tolerance really quick and will make you addicted really quick. And obviously, once you've been using a compound that strong, you're not going to be able to get access to another opiate that can keep up with it, if you will. So moving on from opiates, we have benzos and just other depressants in general. Benzodiazepines, super popular compound, prescribed all around the world, a lot of medical value. You also have the thienodiazepines, which the best known example is atizolam, which is used in a lot of pressed bars that don't have flavor, about the same potency as Xanax. A lot of people like it more, and it's generally cheaper. These thienodiazepines are so close to benzodiazepines that a lot of the time you'll still pop a drug test for taking atizolam. You'll still fail a benzo drug test. But anyways, the moving on, you have GHB and analogs, which are really simple, small chemicals that also can be made cheaply and easily. A lot of the GHB analogs are just GHB prodrugs that are turned into GHB in your body. GHB is actually legally prescribed in the United States. I want to say it's a Schedule 4, 3, 2. I'm not sure, but it is definitely prescribed for sleep. GHB analogs release growth hormone and help you hit delta sleep, lower, deeper sleeps. So sometimes bodybuilders use them and stuff to help get more out of their sleep and get better recovery from it. Barbiturates also, you don't hear a lot about barbiturates. Nobody's really making new ones for a few reasons. Mostly they don't have as good of a safety and side effect profile as benzos. Benzos have pretty much completely replaced barbiturates. I don't see any amount of it moving around, and maybe somebody has some that's kind of obscure, but it's even hard to find it for sale now. There's also some other alcohol compounds, like ethyl alcohol is usually what we think of as the alcohol we drink that's in vodka and beer or whatever, but there's a few different alcohols that cause the same effects. We're not entirely sure the mechanism of actions of alcohol and these other ones either, but interestingly enough, there is two alcohols in particular that exhibit the same effects as ethyl alcohol, but one of them lasts for like 12 hours, I think, and both of them are pretty strong. Like a shot or two would get you intoxicated, and they don't have super great safety profiles, although they are much better for your liver and the rest of your body than ethyl alcohol, because they don't break down into toxic byproducts. Other than that, you've got methylqualone analogs. You got ethylqualone, alpha qualone, some more of those, but qualones are a little overhyped by the older generation just because they had them and they think we don't, or thought we didn't. But generally, the newer benzos are more euphoric, have better effects and safety profiles, and even addiction profiles than the qualones. So some of the newer benzos, like clonazepam is really strong, and flumazolam. Both of those are benzos that are active in the sub-milligram range and are considered to be really euphoric. Flubromazepam has something crazy like a 200-hour or 100-hour half-life. You'd probably be intoxicated for about 12 hours or something. I had a good friend who died using this compound along with mixing it with fentanyl and other opiates. And one day I was with a girl, and he gave the girl some of this stuff, some of the flubromazepam, and she was passed out for about 2.5 days straight, and I was just like, man, what did you give this girl? But anyways, that pretty much covers all the classes of drugs and subclasses of them. The embalm, there's constantly new drugs in every class being discovered all the time, like Edazine, the novel opiate I told you about. It was first identified this year in 2020. I want to say January, February 2020. The pyrovalerones and cathinones, a lot of these drugs that are coming out as research chemicals, designer drugs now, are drugs that were designed by pharmaceutical companies 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, and they're just now they were never marketed to the public or marketed in the pharmaceutical industry, but now they're making their way out of the old research papers and onto the street. Anyways, be looking forward to doing another video for you guys, and maybe some more advanced content later on. Anyways, keep up with it. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys learned something.